The Battle of Towton, 1461, begins under a dark sky, driven by a brutal winter campaign that culminates in a catastrophic confrontation on a frozen Yorkshire plateau. A single longbow arrow, its goosefeather fletching clogged with sleet, notches onto a hemp string as a terrifying storm erupts. This apocalyptic clash determines the crown of England, yet its ultimate shocking secret remains hidden for over 5 centuries. Deep beneath the soil, the bones of a veteran archer hold a physical deformity tracing back to early childhood. The march toward that bone-deep revelation begins in a freezing downpour. 3 centuries of dynastic rule dissolve in the final breaths of a dying sovereign. The aged King Edward III lies on his deathbed in June 1377, his bare fingers stripped of royal rings, while a lone priest holds a cold brass crucifix to his lips. This passing leaves a fractured legacy that eventually ignites the Wars of the Roses. Decades later, the Royal House of Lancaster establishes an immense structural advantage. The Lancastrian host commands 30,000 northern levies along the steep cliffs of Towton Dale. This terrifying concentration of northern military power turns the high plateau into an impenetrable fortification. A fragile peace fractures permanently when an 18-year-old claimant challenges the Lancastrian crown. A detachment of mounted archers, wrapped in wool, grease-soaked cloaks, urges their horses through the freezing black waters of the River Aire under a dark dawn sky. Edward IV sets his vanguard in rapid motion toward the north. He believes his newly proclaimed royal title and the physical momentum of his southern recruits will easily shatter the Lancastrian lines before nightfall. This aggressive pursuit sets the entire Yorkist army on an irreversible path of mutual destruction. The stone bridge at Ferrybridge lies partially demolished by the retreating northern scouts. Under a freezing wind, Yorkist pioneers desperately lay rough wooden planks across the broken stone arches to force a dangerous crossing. Across the river, the antagonist commander emerges from the shadows of the Lancastrian fortress. Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, coordinates his massive host from the safety of the rear lines, relying on professional captains to execute his orders. Somerset watches the sluggish enemy approach through the sleet. Somerset expects the Yorkists to falter at the shattered river crossings. A flurry of black-feathered arrows tears through canvas tents as sleeping soldiers scramble in the dark. Lord Clifford launches a brutal dawn ambush, but the true tactical error lies on the plateau above. Somerset assumes his superior numbers and secure elevated position will allow his archers to easily decimate the Yorkists. He underestimates King Edward IV. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches tall, Edward possesses a terrifying physical presence and a reputation for leading brutal, frontline infantry charges. Edward IV shifts the entire trajectory of the campaign with a single, bold maneuver. Alexander Fauconberg's cavalry forces a lightning crossing at an unguarded river ford in Castleford, spraying ice-cold water against their iron stirrups. This flanking movement catches the Lancastrian rearguard completely by surprise in a shallow valley. Lord Clifford is cornered and struck directly in the throat by a Yorkist arrow, scattering his elite border cavalry. This unexpected, ruthless execution completely eliminates the Lancastrian vanguard before the main armies can even deploy on the high plateau. The narrow plateau between Saxton and Towton rises exactly 150 feet into the freezing air. A hillside of compacted march mud and blood slush waits under a driving blizzard, where thousands of heavy longbows unleash absolute devastation. The claustrophobic ridge is less than a mile wide, hemmed in by the steep drop of Towton Dale and the meandering torrent of the Beck. Somerset's 30,000 men stand packed on the northern crest, watching the outnumbered Yorkists deploy. The terrain itself becomes an inescapable prison for both armies. The Yorkist host stands heavily outnumbered as the morning of Palm Sunday breaks in total isolation. Thousands of men encased in padded jack armor and steel breastplates freeze under a thick layer of heavy sleet driven by a howling southern gale. Edward IV positions 25,000 soldiers with their backs to Saxton, facing straight into the massive Lancastrian line. The Duke of Norfolk's crucial rearguard fails to arrive, leaving the Yorkist right flank dangerously exposed. A terrifying silence grips the packed ranks as the archers brace for the opening command. The brilliant archery stratagem executed by Lord Fauconberg forces the entire Lancastrian line into a desperate gamble. Thousands of spent Lancastrian arrows protrude from the snow-clogged earth of Saxton Field, falling 40 yards short due to the blinding headwind. Fauconberg's archers gather these fallen weapons, launching a devastating return barrage into the defenseless northern ranks. Realizing their defensive position is entirely ruined, the Lancastrian commanders abandon their lines and order a full-scale infantry charge. The charge transforms a tactical archery exchange into a hand-to-hand slaughter whose scars will endure for centuries. The general infantry clash marks the irreversible point of no return as the two massive armies collide hand-to-hand. This terrifying moment marks the true ignition of the Battle of Towton 1461, an irreversible storm of close-quarters violence. Longbows are cast aside as soldiers engage with heavy iron billhooks, poleaxes, and warhammers. The extreme physical strain of this combat imprints itself directly onto the skeletons of the men fighting, locking a hidden trauma into their very bones. Edward IV commits his entire force to this brutal melee despite the overwhelming pressure. The brutal melee is led from the front by the legendary professional soldier Sir Andrew Trollope. Heavy iron billhooks drag armored men down into the blood slush, where daggers pierce the narrow slits of steel visors. Despite an agonizing foot injury caused by a caltrop, Trollope masterminds a savage assault that fractures the Yorkist defense. His veteran northern troops hack through the front lines with terrifying discipline, exploiting their superior numbers. The Yorkist line is buckling, and King Edward's entire army is minutes away from total collapse on this frozen ridge. On this narrow field, Edward IV expects a disciplined stand, but witnesses a catastrophic breakdown. Faltering soldiers throw away their heavy broadswords to escape the suffocating press of bodies as the Yorkist right flank begins to buckle completely. Trollope's relentless pressure pushes the entire southern line back in total confusion toward the village of Saxton. The battlefield becomes a chaotic, screaming mass of men slipping on red ice, facing absolute annihilation. A general panic threatens to dissolve the Yorkist army within minutes, leaving the crown within Somerset's grasp. Somerset's grasp on victory slips the moment the young Yorkist king dismounts his warhorse. Edward's massive 6'4" frame towers through the driving sleet as he moves constantly along the faltering front line, personally executing those who attempt to flee. He shouts into the howling gale that he will live or die alongside his common soldiers on the plateau. This fierce personal defiance directly counters the rising dread among his men. While Somerset remains safely in the rear, Edward's terrifying competence single-handedly holds the breaking line together against overwhelming odds. The fate of these desperate men changes irreversibly in the late afternoon with a sudden arrival. Fresh East Anglian levies march rapidly up the old London road, their pristine white surcoats stark against the blood-stained snow. John de Mowbray, the Duke of Norfolk, finally reaches the field after hours of weather delays. Norfolk flings his unwearied troops directly onto the exposed left flank of the extended Lancastrian line. What happens next will transform this frozen plateau into a slaughterhouse from which 30,000 men will have no escape. Within minutes, the orderly northern retreat disintegrates into a panic-stricken, inescapable slaughterhouse. The swollen, freezing waters of the Beck are choked with hundreds of drowned men-at-arms in steel harness, forming a gruesome, accidental bridge of corpses. Fleeing soldiers scramble frantically over the bodies of their comrades under a relentless pursuit. The Yorkist cavalry lines the banks, executing the trapped northern troops from behind without mercy. The open valley below the plateau transforms into a grim monument of unprecedented intergenerational slaughter that changes England forever. The elite Lancastrian leadership faces total systematic decimation in the immediate aftermath of the rout. Lord Ralph Dacre rests his steel helmet on a wooden bucket to drink from a silver chalice, only for a hidden Yorkist archer boy to pierce his throat with a final arrow. Sir Andrew Trollope and the Earl of Northumberland perish while attempting to organize a desperate rearguard defense. The Northern Army completely disintegrates as thousands of defeated soldiers are hunted down across the bloody meadow, ending any hope of maintaining the Lancastrian line. King Henry VI expects a triumphant return to his capital, but is forced into immediate, desperate exile instead. The freshly decapitated heads of the Earl of Devon and the Earl of Wiltshire rot on the spikes of Micklegate Bar, replacing the remains of Edward's father in a grim display of dynastic vengeance. Edward IV enters the city of York in absolute triumph, preparing a legislative vengeance that will catch every remaining northern lord completely off guard. What drives English soldiers to commit such extreme acts of execution-style overkill against their own countrymen on the field of Towton? Skeletons excavated from a mass grave at Towton Hall lie under forensic laboratory lights, revealing horrific details of perimortem trauma and targeted facial mutilation. Osteological analysis shows that out of 27 skulls examined, researchers identify over 100 separate weapon injuries from heavy sword blades and warhammers. This unprecedented scientific evidence exposes a level of raw, intergenerational hatred that shatters the conventional boundaries of medieval warfare. How do the surviving Lancastrian nobility, exiled in the harsh borders of Scotland, attempt to rebuild their shattered affinities to challenge this fragile new regime? The shattered skull of skeleton Towton 25 under a forensic lens shows a clean, deep cleave through the jawbone, serving as a permanent testament to the cost of dynastic ambition. Physical markers, like an avulsion fracture of the elbow on another veteran skeleton, prove these men train for this catastrophic moment since early adolescence. The physical scars of this conflict run far deeper than politics. The catastrophic loss of life at the Battle of Towton 1461 systematically decimates the ancient Anglo-Norman nobility, altering English kingship forever. The bones of thousands of exhumed soldiers are reinterred in consecrated ground at Saxton Churchyard, leaving a permanent scar across the landscape. This historic self-destruction paves the way for the centralized Tudor state, ending the medieval era of private baronial armies. The defeated Duke of Somerset flees north to regroup his scattered forces, while Edward IV consolidates his grip on London. This ongoing dynastic struggle flows directly into the brutal subsequent engagements at the Battle of Hedgeley Moor and Hexham. The road from Towton runs directly to Northumberland, and to a dual engagement 3 years later that decides the ultimate legitimacy of the Yorkist dynasty. Subscribe to stay with this series. The next chapter is already in production. If you are watching on a television, the QR code on screen takes you directly to the subscribe button on your phone.